was in my discrete choice modeling class. And in fact, those of you who've had my discrete choice modeling class here, or will have it, will see Alex's fingerprints on all the homework assignments, because he was an early adopter of R, and I tell people in the class, you know, I know LibDep. I've given you LibDep scripts to make it, you know, easy on you, but you know, you can use any software package you want that'll do what I'm asking you to do. So Alex was into R, and he said, I want to use R, and so he literally did every homework assignment in LibDep and in R to make sure he got the same answer, and he documented the R scripts and left them for future generations of students to benefit from. And so that's helped a lot.
We appreciate that.
Exactly. So see, there's some murmurs of appreciation already. Alex had a life before UC Davis. He was an undergrad in civil engineering at the University of Toronto. I guess you are an Canadian, if I'm not giving away any secrets. But came to Davis, and we were delighted at that. And then after finishing his PhD with Dr. Niemeyer at UC Davis, went on to Arizona State, where he was for 2 postdocs, 1.5 or so.
Yeah.
And I'm thrilled that we snagged him here, because I think he's great, and I know
Me too.
So wonderful colleague to join the thriving transportation group that we have here. So Alex, looking forward to the talk.
Great, thanks, Beth. My early forays into R were, I think they sort of foreshadowed my commitment to open source software development and public data sources, so hopefully you'll see kind of shadows of that here today. So I just want to thank everyone for coming. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces. I decided to talk about something that I haven't talked about before, because Ram said it was okay to sort of try out sort of experimental material, maybe stuff that isn't fully done. So it's work that I've been conducting with a collaborator at UC Santa Cruz, Dr. Chris Benner. And our goal for the work is to use new data sources to both shed light on and encourage action on problems of housing affordability. And we want to do that by highlighting the environmental implications of policies and practices that restrict affordable housing supply. So one major thing I'm going to do in the course of the talk is operationalize a measure of jobs housing fit that's going to identify locations that are performing poorly on affordable housing if they have a high concentration of low-wage jobs but don't provide enough affordable housing for that low-wage workforce. And that carries with it not only social equity implications, because those low-wage workers probably can't locate close to their jobs, but there are also commute distance implications, VMT implications, and greenhouse gas implications. So I'll show some kind of preliminary modeling work that we've done to try to quantify the magnitude of that effect. The intellectual basis of this work comes from Jobs Housing Fit. Should I try to stay in front of the camera, or does it matter if I...
You can move around, it's all right. Yeah.
I like to walk. So in the late 80s, Bob Severo started to do a number of studies looking at jobs housing balance. So he was thinking about, okay, if there are suburban locations that have a sort of rough balance between the number of jobs and the number of housing units, do we get improved transportation outcomes? And he found that indeed that was the case. So we got lower congestion in areas that were more balanced, higher non-motorized mode share, these sort of transportation outcomes that we like to see. There was subsequent debate. So people like Jen Giuliano and Anthony Downs came in and they said, well, I don't know if we really need to sort of promote jobs housing balance as a matter of policy. We think that areas naturally tend towards balance. So Bob Severo again comes in. He did work showing that this idea of natural balance was in fact illusory. So he looked at places in the Bay Area that had sort of tended towards balance over the 1980s, but showed that in fact a lot of the workers that were employed there didn't actually live in those places. So we could have balance, but that apparent balance can mask a fit if the housing that's available in a local area can't be afforded by the local workforce. So he started to point to that as a problem, and that's where we kind of jump in. So by way of overview and kind of to lay out the argument of my talk here, I'm going to argue that this idea of jobs housing fit is more potent than jobs housing balance. So it sort of sheds light on problems of housing affordability much more readily than jobs housing balance does. We haven't been able to do a good job of operationalizing jobs housing fit in the past, largely because of data limitations that I won't really go into. If folks are interested, I'm happy to talk about this with you offline. The Census Transportation Planning Package is one data set that's been used to look at this stuff in the past. but it doesn't do a very good job. There are some new data sources that Chris and I are using. New data sources that Chris and I are using that facilitate the study of fit and make the links to sustainability and equity outcomes. And I think that piece is pretty important. You know, we often talk about sustainability as sort of comprising three components: environment, economy, and equity. We're really good on the environment, we're really good on the economy in terms of operationalizing, but that social equity piece is a little more slippery. I think there are a number of reasons for that, but I see my work as kind of giving a little bit more weight to that social equity component and tying it into environmental sustainability as well. So I am going to look at low-wage jobs in particular and affordable housing fit. So you could make the argument that fit is important at all housing levels, but I'm going to make the argument that it's most important for low-wage workers, and that's where I'm going to focus my energy. I think it's clear that low-wage workers have a stronger preference for affordability. So saving $1 on housing costs, or saving $1 on transportation costs is going to be much more important for low-wage workers than higher-wage workers, because that value of the dollar saved is very high. Lower-income workers are also more likely to drive older, more polluting automobiles. So to the extent that we can reduce their travel needs, we might get a sort of more bang for our buck in terms of environmental benefits. And there are very real barriers to affordable housing, things like exclusionary zoning policies or density limits that are definitely unjust, even if they're not sort of written or implemented with a discriminatory intent. There's a recent Supreme Court case whose name I can't remember, but the Supreme Court basically found the same thing. It said these barriers to housing affordability are unjust if they have a disparate impact on low-income people, even if there's no exclusionary intent. So I see my work is kind of fitting in there. I'm going to show results for California. Note that the data that I use, the methods that I employ, could be implemented basically anywhere in the country. But California is unique for a number of reasons. I did my PhD there, so I'm sort of most familiar with the geographic context. My students in my class are schooling me every single day about the local context in Georgia, so I still have quite a bit to learn, and I look forward to that. But a lot of my work is sort of focused on California. California has a number of quirks, one of which is Proposition 13. Proposition 13 was a voter initiative that was passed in the late 1970s, and it basically capped property taxes. It capped the rate of increase of property taxes at 1% per year. This had a big impact on local jurisdictions. Property taxes are a very important source of revenue, and this sort of tied the hands of jurisdictions. They can no longer increase property taxes to increase revenue. So it changed the incentives for residential versus commercial development. So now in California, jurisdictions really want to attract commercial development because it brings in sales taxes and property taxes, but doesn't have demands on services. So you don't have to have more schools or more fire departments to serve sort of commercial development. Whereas with residential development, especially affordable residential development, you're often providing a subsidy, also have to provide schools, water, fire, infrastructure, etc. There's a final piece that I don't think is unique to California, and that's that there's an aversion to affordable housing in prosperous communities. So I've got one example here. This is just a clipping from the San Jose Mercury News about an affordable housing project that was proposed in Danville. And there, unhappy residents warned that low-income, high-density housing could be more traffic and crime for Danville. Okay, these people definitely just don't want affordable housing, but they kind of trot out these arguments every time that an affordable housing development is proposed to oppose it. So again, my work, trying to bring in that environmental sustainability component, is saying, look, there are in fact real benefits to affordable housing that we want to take into consideration. Additional reasons to focus on California is that we're already seeing, the title of my talk is The Convergence of Social Equity and Environmental Sustainability. We're already seeing this take place in California under its sort of suite of climate change laws. So California passed a bill to limit its greenhouse gas emissions. There was a companion bill called Senate Bill 535 that takes some of the money raised from the cap and trade revenue for greenhouse gas emissions and directs that revenue to benefit disadvantaged communities. Now, it's not clear in the law what a disadvantaged community is, what a benefit would be, what types of projects they should support. So my work sort of speaks to the idea that we can identify places with poor fit, we can provide better transit service for those communities, and we can potentially provide more affordable housing in areas that need it. There are also some unique challenges in the Bay Area. I hope that folks have heard about things like the Google buses. People know about sort of rampant property price increases in San Francisco, concerns about gentrification and displacement. It seems like there are protests there kind of every single day around this stuff. So a lot of my results are focused on the Bay Area because we're kind of familiar with the political economy of affordable housing there. Now the state already tries to build affordable housing in places that need it through a policy called the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. So the Regional Housing Needs Allocation assigns housing needs to jurisdictions in 4 income categories: very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And the goal is, the numbers are sort of set at the state level and they kind of trickle down to the regions and to the cities and counties. The goal is to make sure that growth in all of these income categories is shared equitably across the state. So they want to increase housing supply. They want to encourage the consideration of housing supply at all of these income levels. The recent iterations of RHNA have started to consider greenhouse gas reduction goals. So they're putting a lot of the new housing into areas that are well served by high quality transit. But there's also a piece that recognizes that we need to do more to provide affordable housing in sort of suburban high opportunity areas as well. RHNA is problematic for a number of reasons. One is that there's consistent underperformance, especially in the lower income categories. So this is a table, I'm just going to highlight a few cities here. What we've got on this table is RHNA performance over the 2007-2014 period. The RHNA numbers are here in this column in each of the 4 income categories. So very low, low, moderate, and above moderate. And these are the building permits issued in that category over the time period. And then the percent of the RHNA that was actually met. So for these cities, Dublin, Fremont, Livermore, and Pleasanton, these are sort of Bay Area suburban cities, we can see that their RHNA percentage met for the very low category is very low, 5%, 7%, 17%. Low is also very low. But for the above moderate category, it's very high, okay? Often exceeding 100%. So many cities, many of these suburban areas that have problems with providing affordable housing are not building the affordable housing that they need, okay? So RHNA can sort of highlight that this is a problem, but doesn't exactly tell us what to do about it. It also doesn't allocate housing numbers based on the location of low-wage jobs. It considers total jobs as sort of one component of many, but doesn't try to match where low-wage jobs are located to the amount of housing that's needed. So the last thing I'll talk about here, to sort of convince you that this stuff matters, if I haven't already, is that one of the cities that I just showed, Pleasanton, tried to, in fact, did enact a housing cap. So Pleasanton voters in 1996 said, we are going to cap the number of housing units that we have in our town at 29,000. We're not going to build any more than 29,000 units. That was passed by voters in 1996 and affirmed in 2008. When it came time to update their general plan in 2005, the housing cap came right up against the RHNA allocation. So it wasn't possible for Pleasanton to zone enough land to build the numbers of housing units that were required under RHNA. And so this put their general plan in direct violation of state law. Okay, so that's enough potentially to invalidate their general plan. What was more problematic was that they also predicted robust job growth over that same time period. So they wanted to double their number of jobs from 2005 to 2025. So they were going to have 105,000 jobs by the end of that planning period, but still only have 29,000 housing units. Bring in Jerry Brown, 2-time governor of California, then Attorney General. He wrote a strongly worded letter to the city of Pleasanton saying that you have a shortfall in affordable housing, and the general plan update doesn't curtail the problem. So he's sort of going beyond just the argument that there's a contradiction between the plan and state law, and saying that this imbalance will force more local employees to find housing in distant communities, create more sprawl, lead to more emissions, and increase dependence on foreign oil, and that is not acceptable. So Jerry Brown starts to make this connection between jobs, housing balance, and environmental outcomes in his letter, even though he didn't necessarily have to, which I thought was pretty great. So Urban Habitat, a nonprofit advocacy organization, sues City of Pleasanton, alleging this violation of state housing law. The housing cap is invalidated in 2010, and Pleasanton is ordered to implement non-illusory zoning changes to address the housing shortfall. In other words, their housing element has to actually zone enough property to accommodate the RHNA numbers. Now, it's important to note that the RHNA numbers only say that you have to zone to meet them, it doesn't say that you actually have to build that housing. That's another reason why RHNA is pretty weak. So RHNA, as I mentioned, is weak for a number of reasons. It's sort of one policy that the state has for increasing affordable housing where it's needed. It doesn't seem to be working well. So what my work is trying to do is to use better data and some more sophisticated methods to understand this problem and to really make the environmental case that we need to do a better job at building affordable housing where it's needed. And we were motivated in this work through contact with people that are working on this issue every day. So a lot of my work is motivated through contact with people sort of working for civil rights, people working for transportation justice, people working for affordable housing, and a lot of the colleagues that I work with similarly have these connections. So this was sort of no different. We partnered up with affordable housing advocates, civil rights folks, and climate change advocates, mostly in Northern California. And they were concerned with identifying jurisdictions that have this imbalance between low-wage jobs and affordable housing units. They wanted something that they could use easily, could inform their advocacy, so we could have a map that sort of points to specific areas that are problematic, and that can be updated over time as new data become available. So we can sort of track progress towards better fit or away from fit, and in fact, toward fit. So I'm going to talk about 3 related efforts that I've been undertaking. Ram said I could talk about maximum 2, but I think that they're all sort of based on the same data sets, but come at the problem in slightly different ways. So the first piece I'm going to talk about is how we develop a metric of jobs housing fit. So sort of going beyond this measure of jobs housing balance to look at low-wage jobs, affordable housing fit, and the sort of incremental information that we get from going in that direction. Then I'm going to show some preliminary modeling results that look at the link between jobs housing fit and commute distance, which really drives home the point that there's a sustainability dimension to this problem. And then in the final piece, the first 2 are kind of static pictures of the Bay Area. In the third piece, we got a little bit of funding through Housing and Urban Development to look at recent changes in the Bay Area. So looking at whether jobs housing imbalances are getting sort of better or worse in the recent time period. And there's a lot of concern recently, sort of post-recession, increasing high-wage job growth in the Bay Area, increasing displacement pressures. So we want to sort of get a real-time snapshot of how we're doing in the Bay. So the first piece is this low-wage jobs affordable housing metric. And what I like to do in my work is not just, I like to sort of motivate my work through contact with advocates, because that ensures that it's going to be, that ensures that it's going to matter and it's going to sort of do something in the world. But I also need to think about my research agenda. So it's helpful if I can sort of bring in some research questions to the work. And this piece was no different. So our research questions here were specifically, what is the value added of a low-wage jobs housing fit metric relative to traditional measures of jobs housing balance? And then we want to sort of think about issues of geographic scale and the appropriate affordability threshold. These are in the paper, but I'm not going to go into too much detail here. I gave a little practice talk to my wife yesterday, and she said this part was boring. So I removed it. But if folks are interested in the sort of finer points of distance equal thresholds versus hard buffers, we can talk about those afterwards. So the data sources that we use are pretty interesting. And these are some of the things that are newly available sort of beyond the Census Transportation Planning Package. In order to look at jobs and affordable rental units, we need data on those things. Data on jobs comes from the Longitudinal Employer Household Dynamics data set. This is a data set that's provided by the U.S. Census. It's updated annually in principle. They just did the release up to 2013, I believe, but for a long time it had been stuck up to 2011. The LHD data has information on locations of jobs, basically across the entire United States, at the census block level. So very fine geographic detail. For folks that don't know, census blocks are sort of the smallest unit of geographic aggregation you get with the census. There are data on jobs by wage category in the LHD, and we're going to look at the low wage jobs. These are folks that are earning less than $12.50 a month, or about $15,000 a year. We're going to pair that up with affordable rental units. So we focused on rental units because low-wage workers are much more likely to rent than own. And for those data, we looked at the American Community Survey 5-year data. We set a 30% affordability threshold. This is a sort of widely accepted threshold of housing affordability. We assume 2 low-wage workers per household, giving us a threshold affordability amount of about $750. Yeah.
So the affordability threshold holds true for California, just know what your real estate market looks like. It still is pretty good for you.
Yeah, I mean, we wanted to use something that was basically a multiple of the wage category in the LAHD. So we didn't really want to play around with that too much. But yeah, and that's because it's such a widely accepted method, it's appropriate to use. But yeah, I think that that's sort of one thing that can be played around with to see how things change. And then in terms of geographic scale, we looked at two geographic scales. One is the jurisdiction. So these are generally cities. There are also some census-designated places. And that level is important because jurisdictions control land use. So they can say, we want a zone for more affordable housing. So it's important to sort of understand imbalances at that scale because they can actually do something to rectify it. We also looked at the neighborhood level, operationalized as a census tract plus a sort of buffer around the census tract, because it's possible that what would appear to be balanced at the jurisdiction level, especially if the jurisdiction is large, could mask sort of neighborhood level imbalances. And we wanted to kind of think about, okay, what is, if we have this sort of small buffer around a census tract, can we think about balanced areas as being sort of pedestrian and non-motorized owner-friendly places? Okay, so the first question is to think about the value added of the low-wage jobs affordable housing metric over and above static measures of jobs housing balance, or sort of traditional measures of jobs housing balance. So what I'm showing here is